This is a pretty big piece of news to kick off the show today, Sandra. I'm John Roberts in Washington. The report reveals that there were a total of 26 confidential human sources in the crowd that day.
David Spunt is live from the Justice Department. He has got the news for us. David.
Sandra, 3 of those were authorized and tasked by the FBI to be there on January 6, 2021. We're coming up on 4 years since that day of the Capitol riot. This IG report specifically focuses on the FBI's handling of confidential human sources, or as we know them, FBI informants. For years, the outgoing FBI director, Chris Wray, has been pressed on reports of undercover agents. According to this new report, there were no undercover FBI agents. However, there were 3 confidential human sources tasked by the Bureau to be in the crowd on January 6th to specifically watch what the report states is concerns over domestic terrorism. Out of those 3, Sandra and John, 1 entered the Capitol, 2 others entered a restricted area. The report says the FBI did not encourage or authorize any sources to go into the building or a restricted area. In addition to the 3 confidential human sources, the FBI told there were 23 that were there on their own. Now, they had worked with the FBI in the past on other cases, but not specifically on the January 6th rally. Some of them entered a restricted area as well. And what stands out in this report, John and Sandra, none of the confidential human sources that entered the U.S. Capitol or a restricted area were prosecuted by the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. Remember, this is an office that is still arresting nearly 4 years later and prosecuting people with this case. Now, in a response to the Inspector General, the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office says the following. The D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office generally has not charged those individuals whose only crime on January 6, 2021 was to enter the restricted grounds surrounding the Capitol, which has resulted in the office declining to charge hundreds of individuals, and we have treated the confidential human sources as consistent with this approach. Outgoing FBI Director Christopher Wray, who announced that he would be stepping down in the next few weeks yesterday, has been pressed on the FBI's role on January 6. Here's just one clip from last year.
If you are asking whether the violence at the Capitol on January 6 was part of some operation orchestrated by FBI sources and/or agents, the answer is emphatically
You're saying
not.
no?
No.
You're saying no?
Not
Okay.
violence orchestrated
Let's
by
move
FBI
on.
sources or agents.
Confidential human sources tasked by the FBI are not undercover agents. These are people that belong to groups like, for instance, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and then became paid FBI informants at certain points in time while still being members of their groups. And of course, John and Sandra, others are not part of any group and just decided to show up to the Capitol for whatever reason and still work with the FBI on the side and provide information. And we're, of course, waiting for more information from Capitol Hill to see if the White House has anything, the Department of Justice, the FBI, as this report just breaking now with the Inspector General.
Got it. Appreciate it. David Spunt on that for us. David, thank you.
All right, let's bring in Fox News legal editor Kerri Urbahn for more on this. I guess the big questions are, what does all of this mean in the grand scheme of things? Also, of the 3 informants that entered the restricted area and the 1 that entered the Capitol, were they just there as observers, or did they actually participate? Did they encourage or foment some sort of rebellious activity?
So a confidential human source is a fancy word phrase for a spy. So we know there were 26 paid spies by the FBI present on the Capitol grounds that day, according to this IG's report. Apparently only 3 of them were authorized to be there. So my question, John, is what were the other 23 doing? Now, they weren't, apparently, according to this report, encouraged or directed to be there, but were they told they couldn't be there? Like, what exactly were they doing? And in fact, some of them, as we learned from this report, entered the restricted area, went into the Capitol. Were they inciting anything? Were they enticing anyone to go with them? I really would love to know what exactly they were saying to the people in the groups that they were part of. I also think it's interesting that this report comes out the day after Chris Wray resigns. It seems to me that he may not have wanted to contend with the questions that, of course, are going to emerge from everything that we're learning today. And the other point I'd like to make is something that David Spunt just raised, where he said that Matthew Graves, who's the U.S. attorney here in Washington, D.C., did not prosecute any of those confidential human sources, spies, that did enter the Capitol that day. And his office, Graves' office, did put out a statement and said that they did not generally prosecute anyone who just went into the Capitol and didn't commit other crimes. My question there is, what does generally mean? How did they make those decisions? And why weren't those particular paid spies part of that group?
The 23 confidential human sources, just reading through this, Kerri, 3 of them entered the Capitol during the riot. An additional 11 entered the restricted area around the Capitol, to your point. Based on what we have learned so far in the details of this report, how would you characterize the findings?
Well, it's very interesting. I think it's especially interesting given that people who were, some of them were just, I think, internet sleuths and the like, have been talking about this for years. And it was only, I think, a couple of years ago that a DOJ attorney in court made the admission that some of these people were present that day. But if you remember, anyone who even raised the possibility that there were paid FBI spies part of what happened, who were part of what happened on January 6th, they were deemed crazy, conspiracy theorists, and the like. Now, look, confidential human sources are a law enforcement tool that are used in all kinds of situations, and we know that some of these people were apparently part of the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. But again, why so many? What were they doing? What were the conversations they were having? And if they were, in fact, according to the IG and the FBI, not authorized to be there, then why weren't they prosecuted like everybody else who were prosecuted for similar issues?
On that point, you and I were talking about this off camera. So far, as of August, 1,488 people who were there on January the 6th have been charged with some sort of an offense. 894 of those people have pled guilty to various offenses. 288 pled guilty to felonies. 606 pled guilty to misdemeanors. Yet none of these confidential informants were charged with anything.
Right, so you have to wonder what were the conversations that were happening behind the scenes. And something else that came out in this report was that the confidential human sources, apparently the information they were providing to the FBI was no different than what everyone else was providing. Like, hey, January 6th, there might be some violence, there might be a thing. So there wasn't any, apparently it sounds like there wasn't anything special that they were revealing. And, you know, again, the questions are, what were those confidential human sources who were, quote, not encouraged or directed to be there by the FBI? What were they saying to the other people in their groups? And the reason I keep raising that is because if, in fact, there were conversations occurring like, hey, let's go in there, let's do that, let's do this. You know, entrapment is a defense. You know, if a government agent induces you to commit a crime, a defendant can raise that in the court of law and say, look, I was trapped into doing something. I was enticed into doing something by the government I otherwise wouldn't have done. Now, the government's response based on this report would probably be, well, they weren't authorized by the government to be there at the time. But then, of course, a question for a judge would be, well, could they have been perceived still as an agent of the government, given that they were, you know, this confidential human source? What did the defendant know about them and their role at the time? I just think this report raises more questions, but certainly at a minimum, gives some credibility to people who have been saying this for so many years.
And I assume that we're never going to learn the names or the identities of the confidential informants. So that will leave open the question as to who it was. We got to jump, but there's so much more to talk about regarding
Thank you, Kerri.
Thank you, Kerri.
Thank you.
Trouble for the FBI over a new report released by the Department of Justice's Inspector General. Now it is public that 26 confidential human sources or informants were in the crowd during the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot. And of those, only 3 were told to be there by the FBI. The other 23 showed up without authorization. Here's Kerri Urbahn, Fox News legal editor.
What exactly were they doing? And in fact, some of them, as we learned from this report, entered the restricted area, went into the Capitol. Were they inciting anything? Matthew Graves, who's the U.S. attorney here in Washington, D.C., did not prosecute any of those confidential human sources, spies, that did enter the Capitol that day. And his office, Graves' office, did put out a statement and said that they did not generally prosecute anyone who just went into the Capitol and didn't commit other crimes. My question there is, what does generally mean? How did they make those decisions? And why weren't those particular paid spies part of that group?
This week, FBI Director Christopher Wray announced he's going to resign before President-elect Trump takes office. Major controversies during Christopher Wray's tenure. Here's a short list. The unprecedented Mar-a-Lago raid, an anti-Catholics memo targeting parents at school board meetings, questions over the Biden family corruption investigation, and Christopher Wray's initial claim that Trump was hit by shrapnel instead of the bullet that hit Trump in the ear during the first assassination attempt. Both the first and the second on his watch, Christopher Wray. In focus now, Ben Domenech, Fox News contributor, The Spectator editor at large. Your top line thoughts as you learn this?
Well, Harris, I think that we still need to know more. I think that this Inspector General report is certainly something that can give us some perspective on this that I think we've been waiting for a very long time about the presence of these figures on January 6th. But as our colleague Kerri Urbahn was saying there, the simple fact is that we don't know what these people were doing there, particularly those who were there without being told to be there by the FBI. And look, I think it was always likely that there was going to be some level of presence. I'm not sure that we expected it to be this significant. I think that we also need to know really every detail that we can about what these people did and why ultimately they were not prosecuted, why, what any consequences are that they have for this activity that was not authorized by the FBI.
So who sent them? I mean, to whom are they confidential? Who are they in the confidence of if it was not the FBI? Who were 23 people spread around the January 6th riot? Were they the beginning of the incitement? Look, we have a lot of questions because we don't know by whom they were sent.
Yes, and I think that the other part of this that we've seen all along is that we can't trust any of these entities when it comes to being transparent with us about what really happened. We can't really trust them because they've already shown themselves to be not trustworthy in so many different other aspects, issues that have obviously degraded the feeling of the American people when it comes to the faith that they have in these institutions. And as I've said before, the simple fact is that we can't just burn the FBI to the ground. You need an FBI that actually functions in order to protect the American people. But they do not seem to be functioning that way, and they haven't been functioning that way for a long time. And that's something that has to be fixed in this new administration.
Yeah, and the shame of that is that of all the thousands of men and women who work at the FBI, they're doing their jobs, the rank and file. The leadership, on the other hand, has somehow, some of it, figured out that the job is to work against us as American citizens. Yeah. We got to redefine their jobs or just kick them out and replace them. The guy at the top gets that message. He's on his way out. The politics of the pardon wagon that we're seeing at play with Joe Biden, because it seems like he's just pulling a list of names and a kid's wagon behind him and just pulling them out when he wants to. Well, Americans, particularly some Democrats, don't like it. A Fox News poll finds 63% of voters disapprove of Biden's decision to pardon his son, Hunter Biden. Now, Democrats are warning Biden against issuing preemptive pardons before he leaves office. Some possibilities: Anthony Fauci, Liz Cheney, Adam Schiff, Hillary Clinton, Mark Milley. The left-leaning Washington Post editorial board says Biden's potential get out of the jail free card are unnecessary and imply guilt. Radio host Charlemagne the God.
I don't think President Biden should do preemptive pardons either. Makes people look guilty, if you ask me. Biden should be pardoning all the nonviolent drug offenders in federal prison. Those are the pardons he should be working on before he get his old out of here. Why would I be pardoning you if you don't have any crimes connected to you? Don't that make you look guilty?
Well, he said it all. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre would not commit to an answer about whether Joe Biden would issue these preemptive pardons.
I'm not going to get ahead of the president. As I said, we'll have more. The president will have more to announce over the upcoming weeks as we close out our time here. It would be a bad move on my behalf if I preempted the president or previewed anything that the president was thinking about, considering, and so this is something that he's going to talk with his team about, and I just don't have anything beyond that for you.
Yeah, that's because often she'll say stuff like, he'd never pardon Hunter Biden. Biden makes her a liar. It makes a lot of people liars because he does what he wants.
So I completely agree that with Charlemagne in terms of the idea that a preemptive pardon does make you look guilty. I think that a lot of people involved here, though, are concerned that they may have done something that they could be found guilty of. And that's, I think, the whole reason that they're having this conversation. A preemptive pardon in this instance would be really an incredible thing, something that, you know, we just do not have the type of precedent for. And it's something that would be, I think, a complete abuse of power. The only concern that I have about it at this point, and I think it's the reason that the Washington Post is giving Biden this signal, is that the pardon of Hunter Biden came after so many people who are on his side were using his resistance to it as a sign of his moral, nobility, and he was someone who was acting out of principle. He wasn't going to do something just in the interest of his family, et cetera, et cetera. As soon as that went out the window, I think they're now concerned that this guy doesn't owe anything to anybody. He's at the end of his career. He doesn't really care about any of this stuff, and he may do things that, frankly, are out of control in terms of the use of the pardon power.
He's an octogenarian who's been in politics for 5 decades. Yeah. Don't you think we already know who he is? Like, he's just given us more receipts of who he is. I mean, come on. Yesterday, Joe Biden commuted the sentences of nearly 1,500 people, the largest presidential act of clemency on a single day in modern history. Here's a statement from him. I have the great privilege of extending mercy to people who have demonstrated remorse and rehabilitation, restoring opportunity for Americans to participate in daily life and contribute to their communities, end of quote. There's been a lot of backlash over one person in particular getting mercy, a former county judge, Michael Conahan. He was one of 2 judges convicted in a notorious Kids for Cash scheme in Pennsylvania. The 2 accepted millions of dollars in kickbacks in exchange for populating for-profit juvenile prisons. Investigators say more than 2,500 children were given far harsher sentences than they deserved. One of those children took his own life. By the way, he was supposed to get 17 and a half years behind bars. That was 2011. Biden let him go.
Yeah, I don't think that this is a situation where you can make any case that he deserved to have this type of treatment. And as we all know, this is one of those powers where the people that you are connected with, the ability to go behind the scenes and interact with this White House, as it has been abused in the past in other instances, really connects these politically powerful people with these different cases. They have advocates that work for them, and oftentimes they are undeserving of this type of treatment. This is another example of it. And again, this is Biden being out of control and not having to be beholden to anybody in his final days. And I just hope it doesn't get any worse, Harris. There's still time to go with Joe Biden technically as the president of the United States.
38 and a half days. That was a full paragraph you spoke in 4 or 5 words. Ben Domenech, thank you very much.